I decided to send you this in the form of a video because I know you mentioned that it's difficult to read things about Naki's death, and I imagine me sending you this detailed explanation of his records and having you read the first paragraph and having it be so difficult to handle that you kind of put it down and think you'll get to it later, and pretty soon kind of the days go by and you think I'll get to it tomorrow and I'll get to it tomorrow night because it's difficult. So I thought it might be harder to turn me off as opposed to putting a piece of paper down. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. I really have two goals that I want to accomplish, and I don't think this will have to take very long. I want to equip you with some education so that you can explain how Naki died to the girls, and to maybe give you a little bit of peace of mind and an explanation on what was going on inside Naki's body leading up to this. Of course, if you have any questions, I want you to call me. I'm available for you anytime, and I'll call you also to follow up and make sure you got this and see if you have any questions. So there are a few, before I kind of start going through his autopsy report, there are a few kind of take-home messages and things that I wanted to get out there early in case you do decide to shut it off. The first things will have already been said. The first thing is that you can't die from obesity. People can die from a complication of obesity, in other words, of what obesity causes, but no one can die from being overweight. If someone's heart is what went wrong when they were obese, usually that would mean that their heart is working to push blood out through vessels that are narrow or that are clogged or something like that, and that actually wasn't the case with Naki either. You also can't die from gallstones. Gallstones are pretty normal. You and I might have some. Most people live their whole lives asymptomatically, or they never have symptoms. They never know about their gallstones, and they live a completely asymptomatic life, die, and then during the autopsy it's found that they had gallstones that have always been there. I remember when we took anatomy and we dissected our cadavers, almost all of them had gallstones, but when reading the history of those patients, none of them had ever complained about gallstone pain. I also wanted to share with you, in case you didn't know, that when people do have pain from a gallstone, like an acute attack of trying to pass a gallstone, the pain is referred to the lower back, sometimes the right side of the neck, but never the left side of the neck, and never the arm. Naki's autopsy report said that he did have gallstones, but it said that there were no gallstones in the tubes that go from the gallbladder itself to the intestines. It's called the biliary tree, and so I don't think that Naki was trying to pass a gallstone, or a stone would have shown up somewhere along that in that plumbing or in those pipes on the way to his intestines. So gallstones are pretty normal. As I said, up to 50% of people have them and don't know they have them, and they're not really causing a problem. Obesity is defined by an equation, and when they came up with that equation, they did not use Polynesians to come up with the standard values. They used healthy white people. And so as a result of that, almost any athlete who's muscular is considered obese, or they would have a BMI over 25. And I think I shared with you in an email before that when you factor in my height and weight, I'm actually technically overweight too, which is not true. So almost all linemen are going to be considered obese by the definition. And the definition is just an equation that includes your height and your weight. And so I wouldn't get too hung up on the the fact that Naki has this label of being obese, just because that's going to be every Polynesian, and most Polynesians can live a completely full life while being labeled as obese. So there's something else I wanted to address too. I heard a rumor that you are sort of accepting some blame for maybe what happened to Naki, and I don't think that that's accurate. So Naki died of a genetic disease, and unfortunately his fate without prior intervention was decided when, when his mom's egg met up with his dad's sperm. So he had a genetic complication. It's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and I sent you a detailed explanation of what that is a few months ago. I'd be happy to explain that again if you need that. But if Naki had have been even really, really skinny and had no body fat, he probably still would have died at the same age and in the same way, because that hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is causes the heart to become enlarged, and it's not becoming enlarged related to what's going on in the rest of the body. The other thing I wanted to briefly say in case I forget is that if you want me to do a video like this for the girls, I could do that and try to explain it in a bit more layman's terms. Please ignore the pounding outside here. So let me just quickly provide some evidence in Naki's autopsy report for the fact that obesity, or that his body fat hadn't made it into his arteries yet. If you look at, this is his report. If you want to have it in front of you, you can, but if not, you can just listen to. If you look at page 3 of 5 here, the internal examination, where they go through each of the body's organ systems, I thought it was interesting, and I underlined it. I underlined anytime they talked about his vessels. And the reason I was interested in what was going on in his blood vessels is because if your blood vessels are narrow... Alright, I just had to switch the tape, sorry about that. I think I was saying something about his blood vessels being narrow. What I was trying to say is that if the blood vessels leading away from his heart were narrow, it would make his heart have to work harder to pump against through a narrow vessel. This would be like if you had two hoses, one hose with a great big diameter like that, and another hose with a small diameter like that, and you were trying to, blow water, the same volume of water through each of the hoses. It'd be really easy to blow water through the hose with the large diameter because there's almost no resistance to the flow of the water. But if it was a really, really small hose, it's much harder to get water through that. It would require you to work harder. So if Naki had narrow arteries throughout his body, that would make his heart have to work hard. And if his heart was working hard, just like any muscle, it would enlarge so it could handle that workload. However, when reading through his autopsy report, all of the arteries they checked, which they checked some arteries in his head, they checked the arteries around his heart and leading away from his heart, and they also checked some arteries in the respiratory system. In every case, his arteries were normal and nice, wide and clean arteries. Let me quote some of the things on page 3 here. It said, "The vessels at the base of the brain are normally configured and unremarkable." Unremarkable means that the blood vessels leading up to his brain were as good as yours or mine, assuming those are good. And then the cardiovascular system here, when they checked his coronary arteries, those are the arteries that supply blood to the heart. It said that they arise normally, follow the usual distribution, and are widely patent. That means they're nice and wide. Widely patent without evidence of significant atherosclerosis or narrowing or hardening. So the arteries supplying his heart were great, in other words. Or no thrombosis. There were no clots in there, or no parts of the wall that were forming clots. And they also checked the aorta. The aorta is the one blood vessel that leads away from our heart, and the aorta will continue to branch and branch and branch and supply blood to our whole body. And if the aorta is narrow, which is really common, then that can make your heart have to work really hard to get blood out through that narrow aorta. But it says that the aorta and its major branches arise normally, follow the usual course, and are widely patent. So he had a nice wide aorta. It was not difficult for his heart to pump blood out through that widely patent aorta. And it said that it was free of significant atherosclerosis and other abnormalities. So his aorta was completely healthy. The vena cava, that's the vein that returns most of the lower part of our body to the heart. It was also free of any thrombi, meaning any clots, and it was totally normal. Under the respiratory system here, it says that his pulmonary arteries, or the arteries, there are lots of those that supply his lungs. It said that they're normally developed, patent, and without thrombus or embolus, meaning that there was no problems going on. There were no clots. Thrombus or embolus is just a fancy word for clot. And if there were clots present, it could mean that he had that his arteries were damaged, maybe from high blood pressure or something like that. But in his case, his pulmonary arteries, his coronary arteries, the aorta, the blood's returning, the arteries return, or the veins, returning blood to his heart, and the vessels at the base of his brain were all completely normal. So all of his arteries were normal. On the cardiovascular system, it says that his left ventricle, that's the chamber, the left chamber of your heart that does most of the work. When it contracts, it squeezes blood out through your whole body. It said that that was enlarged. And so now the question is, why would, if all of his arteries are nice and wide and patent and free of any abnormalities, why would that left ventricle become enlarged? Why is it? What's making it become enlarged? Why is it having to work hard? Because a muscle doesn't just enlarge on its own. It enlarges if it's having to work hard. So Naki's heart was having to work harder than normal, but it was not because of his arteries. Okay? And if obesity would get to someone's heart, obesity would have to do it through making your arteries narrow. So the fact that Naki's arteries and all of his blood vessels were great tells me that maybe the fat was there, but it wasn't causing any problems, at least not in his cardiovascular system. It might have been causing emotional problems and things like that. But on the second page, the only thing I underlined here was some myocyte hypertrophy, and I think I talked about that. Myocyte is this fancy word for a muscle cell. Hypertrophy means enlarged, and so he had some enlarged muscle cells. I think I explained that a little bit. It talks here about his SA node, and the SA node is it's the natural pacemaker of the heart. It's what sends the electrical signal through the heart, and because his heart was enlarged, it made that SA node have to work a little bit harder, and so the blood vessels supplying it became a little bit thicker. But I'm not sure that that's that relevant. You can ask me specifically if you have any questions about that. The rest of his autopsy report is basically a toxicology screen or a drug screen. They wanted to know if there were any drugs in his body at the time, because a lot of drugs can precipitate or cause heart attacks. And as you can see here, they were all negative because Naki was a good boy and kept the word of wisdom. So maybe some take-home messages, or maybe let me finish the story of what would have made his heart why was his heart having to work hard then? If all of his arteries were great, why would his heart be enlarged? And it's because of a genetic complication, unfortunately. I believe Rex has the same complication. The complication is dominant. That means you have a 50-50 chance of inheriting from your parents that complication. So 50-50 is pretty good chance. And I believe Rex has that too. And it's treatable, but I don't feel like you can blame yourself for that. And obesity is kind of I think if you talk about Naki's death, we need to talk about his genetic heart complication, or the cardiomyopathy. And we can talk about other other medical things that were going on, other health conditions Naki had, but those really aren't related to his death. Okay, the fact that he was labeled as obese, again, I don't, that label is should probably be changed, because it doesn't account for people who are real muscular. Look, I do it like I am, but real muscular. He had some gallstones. Okay, so that was a health condition, but that doesn't relate at all to why he died. So, I don't know that I would blame yourself. You certainly can't blame yourself for why he died, because he was sort of programmed to die at a young age because of the type of genes that he had. And there's other things like the obesity and the gallstones, and I can't remember if there were any other abnormalities. I don't think so. I think he was completely healthy otherwise. Those are other conditions, but they're not really related to why he died, as evidenced by the fact that all of his blood vessels were nice and wide. And so I want that to be clear. Let me see here if I had anything else to mention. I don't think so. I'm sure I'll think of a bunch of things after I send this to you that I wanted to address. I didn't want to make this too long, so I didn't go through this in detail. I'd be happy to. I really need to know how I can help you and what will be the most helpful. If you have questions, of course, I want you to call, and or we can do it via emails if you're more comfortable with that. I want to tell you that I love you. I think about you pretty often, and I wish I was there. Oftentimes when I read on your blog that you're having a hard time, I wish I was there to kind of give you a hug. And I think it's great that Junior has been so involved with the girls. I wish I could join with him in that effort and take them and play with them and help them laugh. I look forward to when I get to move back out west and see you guys more often, especially especially your family. I feel like we did so many fun things with the holidays, and it was real tough to move out here away from you guys. I want to bear my testimony to you that I really believe that everything that we learn in church is true, and I have had way too many personal experiences with the Holy Ghost to believe that a lot of the things we hear in church are just made up, or that it was just a smart group of guys that came up with the doctrines that we learn. So I know that it's in the church where we can find peace and comfort. It's a bit hypocritical for me to say I really don't know much of adversity. I haven't had very many trials in my life, and so it must be very difficult to hear someone like me say how much the church can help when we have adversity, because I don't know much